Every morning for 6 years now. I have woken up to the same silence. The bed beside me is empty, the pillow cold and untouched. Once, there had been the sound of humming in the kitchen, the faint crackle of bacon in the pan, and the unmistakable smell of fresh coffee drifting through the hallway. Margaret, my wife, always rose before me. She claimed the dawn gave her peace, that it reminded her of when we were first married and had to wake before sunrise to save on heating bills in our drafty apartment. Now, I wake to nothing but the creak of my old bones and the ticking of the alarm clock. My name is Elliot Marston. I am 76 years old, a retired school principal living in Fort Collins, Colorado. My wife, Margaret, passed away suddenly from a heart attack on a Tuesday afternoon in early autumn. The doctor told me it was quick, painless even. But those are words people say when they don't know what else to offer. The truth is, she was here one moment and gone the next. And my world has never been the same. I make my own coffee now. Slowly. Deliberately. As though stretching out the ritual can bring her back. 3 tablespoons of grounds. 200 milliliters of water. And just a pinch of salt. That last touch was hers. Something she learned from her grandmother. Margaret used to say it softened the bitterness. No matter how hard I try, my coffee never tastes like hers. I sit at the kitchen table with my mug and my newspaper. The house feels too big for one person. Margaret and I lived here for over 40 years. Every wall still holds a piece of her. The hallway is lined with photos of our daughter Clarissa, school portraits, piano recitals, graduation. Margaret insisted we keep them all, no matter how crooked her smile looked or how uneven the bangs were cut. Clarissa was our pride and joy. For years, she was all we talked about. Margaret used to say she had her father's stubbornness and her mother's charm. She grew up fast, though, faster than either of us could follow. After college, she moved to Denver, became a corporate lawyer, and soon after, married Graham, a real estate developer. I remember the first time Margaret met him. She whispered to me that his smile didn't reach his eyes. I brushed it off then. Maybe I shouldn't have. These days, Clarissa rarely visits. When she does, it is never for long and never without a reason. A new tuition bill for the grandchildren. A renovation for their mountain house. Another unexpected expense that somehow always lands at my doorstep. She calls me Dad. But more often than not, I feel like an ATM. I never said no. Not once. Perhaps because Margaret always insisted we help. Perhaps because I believed giving was the only way left to keep my daughter close. The grandchildren, Ethan and Sophie, are almost strangers to me now. They live their own lives in Boulder, busy with college, busy with friends. I see their faces in photographs Clarissa sends at Christmas, but I cannot remember the last time I heard their voices. Margaret used to cry quietly after phone calls ended, when Clarissa had rushed her off the line or forgotten to invite us to a birthday. They're busy, she would say, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. They have their own lives. I believed her then. I wanted to believe her. But deep down, I knew Margaret was grieving the slow vanishing of family ties. Now it is only me in this house, surrounded by silence that is heavier than any sound. I sometimes walk into the living room and wait for Margaret to appear in her rocking chair, knitting or laughing at one of her mystery shows. But the chair remains empty. As I sip my coffee, staring at the newspaper headlines, I hardly register. I wonder how many more mornings will look like this. Quiet. Lonely. A life measured out in teaspoons of coffee and the ticking of a clock. And then, one ordinary morning, the phone rang. I didn't know it yet, but that call from Clarissa would unravel the fragile routine I had built and push me into a story I never thought I would live, the kind where family ties turn into chains, and where survival depends on whether you are strong enough to cut them loose. The phone's sharp ring jolted me from my thoughts. Few people still called my landline. For a moment, I let it ring, half afraid it might be another telemarketer. But something inside urged me to answer. "Hello?" My voice cracked, rough with age and disuse. "Dad, it's me, Clarissa." Her voice. My daughter's voice. It had been months since I last heard it. My grip on the receiver tightened. "Clarissa," I said slowly, savoring the sound. "It's good to hear from you." There was a pause. Then the measured tone I had come to recognize. Not warmth. Not curiosity about my health. Just business-like precision. Graham and I are taking a trip next month. To the California coast. We thought you might like to join us. 2 weeks. Fresh air. Ocean view. It will do you good. For a second, I thought I had misheard. An invitation? To travel? My daughter had not asked me to accompany her anywhere in nearly a decade. To the coast? I repeated, hardly believing my ears. Yes. We've rented a cottage near Carmel by the sea. 3 bedrooms. Beautiful property. Walking distance from the beach. She spoke as if reciting from a brochure. It's already booked. We'll be driving, so we can pick you up on the way. I sat very still, staring at the empty chair across from me, the one that should have held Margaret. How many times had she dreamed of vacations with the family? Of laughter over beach bonfires? She had begged Clarissa for weekends together. Clarissa always said she was too busy. And now, suddenly, here was an invitation. That sounds wonderful, I said cautiously. But why now? My daughter's sigh carried down the line. Sharp. Impatient. Because you hardly leave the house anymore. Dad. You need to get out. You can't stay cooped up in Fort Collins forever. Graham thought the trip might help you. The way she said Graham's name, as if it were a seal of authority, unsettled me. He had always been at the center of her decisions, steering them like a silent captain. Do I need to bring anything? I asked. Just your passport, credit card, medications, and a few clothes. The cottage has everything else. We'll handle the rest. Her instructions came too quickly, too rehearsed. I felt the prickle of suspicion. Why did she emphasize what I should bring, as if she were writing a checklist for herself? Why the sudden urgency to include me after years of distance? Still, a part of me, the part that still longed for connection, that still remembered Clarissa as a little girl with ribbons in her hair, wanted desperately to believe this was real. That she missed me. That she finally wanted to bridge the chasm between us. All right, I said after a long pause. I'll come. Her voice brightened. Just a little. Good. Well, be there on the 15th. Be ready by 8 in the morning. And with that, she hung up. I sat frozen. Receiver still pressed to my ear, long after the dial tone hummed. The invitation should have filled me with joy. Instead, it left me uneasy, like a man stepping into water without knowing its depth. For the next 3 weeks, I tried to bury the unease beneath careful preparations. I folded clothes, counted pills, checked my passport twice. I even tucked $1,000 cash into an envelope and slipped it into my shirt pocket, just in case. But as the day of departure drew closer, I could not shake the sense that something waited for me on that coast. Something hidden beneath the promise of family and ocean air. And I, the foolish old man that I was walking straight toward it. The morning of the 15th arrived with a pale Colorado sunrise. I had been awake since 4, too restless to sleep. My small suitcase stood by the door, everything neatly folded the way Margaret once taught me. I had checked the locks twice, unplugged the toaster, and set my worn leather shoes beside the mat. At exactly 9 o'clock, a sleek black SUV pulled into the driveway. Graham sat behind the wheel, engine still running, his jaw tight, as though even idling wasted his time. Clarissa stepped out in a beige blazer and pressed trousers, looking like she was heading into a boardroom rather than a family trip. Sorry we're late, Dad, she said briskly, brushing past me into the house without knocking. Traffic outside Denver was a nightmare. Are you ready? I gestured toward my suitcase. I've been ready for hours. She gave me a once-over, her gaze pausing on my slacks. Please tell me, you're not planning to wear those pants the whole trip. They're clean, I said evenly. They look like they're from another century, she muttered, rolling her eyes in a gesture that reminded me painfully of her teenage years. Come on. Graham's waiting. I took one last look at my quiet home before stepping outside. The SUV's back door felt heavy as I climbed in. Good morning, Graham, I offered. He didn't turn his head. Uh-huh, he grunted, eyes locked on the road. Clarissa buckled in beside him and turned halfway to me. It's about an 18-hour drive, Dad. Well, stop overnight. Did you bring your medicine? Yes, I said. sharper than I intended. I am not a child. Just making sure, she replied with that condescending smile that never reached her eyes. As we pulled onto the highway, the world I knew, my quiet street, the red oak tree Margaret planted, the porch where we used to sit at dusk, slipped away behind me. A strange heaviness filled my chest, as if I were leaving more than a house, as if I were leaving safety itself. For the first few hours, the car was filled with the hum of tires on asphalt and the tapping of Clarissa's phone. Every few minutes, she leaned toward Graham, showing him her screen, whispering too softly for me to catch. Sometimes he chuckled. Sometimes he frowned. Always they kept their voices low, as if I weren't there. I tried to break the silence. How are Ethan and Sophie? I haven't heard from them in a while. They're fine, Clarissa said quickly. Sophie's seeing some musician. Ethan's still struggling with chemistry. Graham snorted. If he studied more and partied less, it wouldn't be so hard. I bit my tongue. At their age, Margaret and I had believed in balance, work, and joy together. But I had learned long ago that any advice from me was dismissed as meddling. Around noon, I offered, should we stop for lunch? My treat. Clarissa turned in her seat, her expression patient but strained. Dad, we just left 3 hours ago. I thought maybe. We planned a stop in Des Moines. There's a place Graham's colleague recommended. Her tone ended the discussion. I leaned back, hands folded tightly in my lap. Outside, the plains stretched endlessly, golden fields under a sky too wide to hold. Inside the car, the silence pressed against me like glass. And for the first time, I wondered if I had made a mistake in saying yes. By the time we crossed into California 2 days later, I was worn thin. The constant hum of the engine, the stiff hotel mattress from the overnight stop, the endless small corrections from Clarissa. Dad, hold your fork properly. Dad. You already told that story. All of it gnawed at me until I longed for silence even more than rest. Late afternoon light spilled across the coast as we wound down a narrow road, lined with windswept cypress trees. The Pacific stretched wide and gray on the horizon, its breath cold and damp against the car windows. Graham eased the SUV into a gravel driveway and announced, "Here we are." The cottage was no cottage at all. It was a grand, 2-story rental home perched on a cliff, white walls glowing against the ocean backdrop. The kind of place you saw in glossy magazines, arched windows, wide decks, manicured gardens. My throat tightened at the sight. Margaret would have loved it here. She would have stood on that deck for hours, pointing out gulls and tracing the line where the sea met the sky. Inside, the house smelled of cedar and sea air. A stone fireplace anchored the living room, and glass doors opened to a patio with a sweeping ocean view. Clarissa moved with brisk ownership, her heels clicking on the hardwood as if she had purchased the place herself. Your room is upstairs. Last door on the right, she said, tossing me a key. It's cozy. I climbed the staircase slowly, my knees protesting. At the end of the hallway, I found the so-called cozy room. It was narrow, with a single bed pushed against the wall, one dresser, and a small window facing the neighbor's garage. No ocean view, no sea breeze, just the faint sound of traffic from the road below. Downstairs, Graham carried in 4 massive suitcases without effort. No one offered to help with mine. I unpacked alone, placing my shirts into the dresser and setting Margaret's photo on the nightstand. Her smiling face was the only warmth in the cold little room. When I joined them on the patio, Clarissa and Graham were already sipping wine, 2 glasses of red, glowing in the sunset. A third glass sat empty. We're going to a vineyard tour tomorrow, Clarissa announced. Graham booked it weeks ago. Lots of walking and tastings. So maybe you'd prefer to rest here at the house? I'd like to see the vineyard, I said. I can skip the tasting. They exchanged a look, quick and sharp. Graham chuckled. Sorry, Dad. Tickets are limited. Already paid for. Maybe next time. I sat down without answering, listening to the waves crash below. The ocean was vast, the house luxurious, the evening golden. And yet, I had never felt smaller, more unnecessary. Somewhere deep inside, a whisper took root. They had brought me here for something else entirely. On the third evening, Clarissa announced we were going to dinner. A very fine restaurant, she said, her tone full of importance. You'll need to wear something decent. Dad. I chose the only suit I had brought. The black one I had worn at Margaret's funeral. It hung loosely on me now. I had lost weight in the past few years, but it was pressed and clean. As I adjusted my tie in the mirror, Margaret's picture watched from the nightstand, her eyes kind and steady. When I came downstairs, Clarissa frowned. Dad, that suit looks like you're going to a memorial service. Don't you have anything else? It is my best, I replied quietly. At least it's black, Graham muttered, grabbing his blazer. Harder to see how old it is in dim light. The restaurant was perched above the ocean, all glass walls and flickering candles. The maitre d' led us to a table by the window, the surf below thundering against the rocks. Around us, couples in tailored jackets and elegant dresses murmured over wine. I felt the weight of their stares, conscious of my baggy suit and weary face. Clarissa ordered for me without asking. Hell, have the steamed halibut, no salt, with vegetables. Id like the steak, I began, but she cut me off with a bright smile aimed at the waiter. Dad's blood pressure doesn't allow it, she said. That's not true, I protested softly. She patted my hand. Of course you forgot. That happens. Heat rose in my face. I wanted to argue, but the waiter was already gone. Graham leaned back in his chair, smirking. Don't want another Olive Garden incident, do we? Clarissa? Oh. God. She laughed. When Dad dropped spaghetti all over himself and we had to buy him a new shirt. I blinked. There had never been any such incident. I hadn't been to Olive Garden with them in years. That never happened, I said firmly. Clarissa's smile faltered, her eyes flashing with irritation. You don't remember. That's all. It's normal at your age. The words landed like stones. My age. My memory. My worth. I tried to focus on the halibut when it arrived, tasteless and pale on the plate. My hands trembled, not from weakness but from rage. I had no safe place to put. Halfway through the meal, another couple approached, an elegant woman in pearls and a man with silver cufflinks. Clarissa, Graham, what a surprise. Clarissa lit up, introducing me like a child's burden. This is my father, Elliot. We brought him along so he wouldn't be alone. The woman smiled sweetly. How thoughtful. My father refuses to travel. Old trees don't replant easily. I forced a polite nod, but inside I was shrinking. Then Clarissa added lightly, sometimes I feel more like his mother than his daughter. I have to remind him of his medicine. His meals last week, he nearly left the stove on. That is a lie, I said, louder than I intended. The couple looked startled. Graham shot me a warning glare. Don't start, Dad. Clarissa whispered sharply. Smile plastered on her face. In that moment, I realized they were constructing a story about me. One where I was no longer a man but a helpless shell. And in the eyes of strangers, they were succeeding. I excused myself, pushing back my chair. In the restroom, I gripped the sink, staring at my reflection. When had my own daughter begun treating me as a prop in her performance? I didn't know yet, but I knew the answer was going to cost us both dearly. The next morning, the cottage was strangely quiet. No voices drifting from the kitchen. No sound of Graham tapping at his laptop. No clink of wine glasses left behind on the patio. I checked the clock, nearly 10. I never slept this late. Batting downstairs, I found the living room empty. On the kitchen table lay a folded note in Clarissa's handwriting. Dad. Graham and I went to explore a neighboring town. We'll be back late tonight. There are sandwiches in the fridge. Don't miss us. See. I stared at the page until the letters blurred. No apology for leaving me behind. No invitation to join. Just instructions, as though I were a pet to be fed and left alone. I opened the refrigerator. 2 sandwiches wrapped in plastic sat on a plate. I wasn't hungry. Instead, I poured a glass of juice, carried it to the terrace, and lowered myself into a chair. The morning was beautiful. Cloudless skies, gulls wheeling overhead, the steady crash of waves below the cliff. Yet I couldn't enjoy it. My thoughts churned. Something felt wrong. Not just the note, but the way they had acted for days, the whispers, the invented stories, the controlling tone. And then I remembered the halibut at dinner, the smirk on Graham's face, Clarissa's patronizing pat on my hand. They weren't just belittling me. They were building a case. I decided to take a walk to clear my head. Upstairs. I reached for my wallet on the dresser. My stomach dropped. It was there. But when I opened it, the slot where my credit card should have been was empty. Only the cash remained, the $1,000 I had brought just in case. Hands trembling, I searched again. Every pocket, every flap. Nothing. I rifled through my suitcase. That was when I noticed something else. My passport, which I had tucked securely inside the inner pocket of the bag, was now buried under a pile of shirts, as though someone had gone through my belongings. My chest tightened. They had taken it. The card, the passport, maybe more. I sat on the edge of the bed, struggling to breathe. Margaret's photo stared back at me from the nightstand. "What are they doing to me?" I whispered. Images tumbled through my mind. The lies at the restaurant, the whispers in the car, the way Graham's eyes narrowed when I asked to join the vineyard trip. And then it struck me with the force of a wave. They were trying to make me look incompetent, helpless, maybe even insane. And here, in a strange town thousands of miles from home, with no id and no money, who would believe me? My first thought was to call the police. But what would I say? That my daughter had taken my card? That my son-in-law had hidden my passport? They would laugh. Or worse, they would believe Clarissa's rehearsed story of an old man slipping into dementia. I pressed my palms against my knees, forcing myself to think. No one was going to save me. Not the police. Not the neighbors. Not the strangers at the restaurant. If I wanted to get home, if I wanted to prove I wasn't the feeble caricature they were trying to create, I would have to save myself. And that was the moment I decided. Whatever their plan was, it would fail. I locked the bedroom door and sat on the edge of the bed, my heart pounding like a drum. For the first time in years, I felt not just lonely but hunted, cornered like an animal. Clarissa and Graham had stripped me down to what they thought was nothing. An old man. Stranded. Powerless. But they had underestimated me. I pulled the small envelope of cash from my breast pocket. Counting it again, 9 crisp $100 bills and 2 50s. Enough to get me started. Enough to keep me from starving. Enough to move. I tucked the money back into my shirt and looked at Margaret's photo on the nightstand. "You always said I was too trusting," I whispered. "Well, not anymore." The first step was to get out of this house before they returned. I shoved the bare essentials into a smaller bag I found in the closet. One change of clothes. My medications. The driver's license I had nearly forgotten, I still carried. And Margaret's photo. Everything else could rot in that narrow upstairs room. In the hallway, I noticed a tourist brochure left on a shelf. I unfolded it and found a map of Carmel and surrounding towns. The bus depot was circled, just 3 kilometers away. My legs weren't what they used to be, but I could walk that far. I had to. I slipped out the back door, locked it with the spare key, and kept the key in my pocket. A petty revenge, perhaps. But the thought of them fumbling at the door later gave me strength. The walk to town was slow and grueling. The sun blazed. The coastal wind tugged at my jacket. And each step sent a bolt of pain through my knees. Families strolled with laughing children. Couples walked hand in hand. Joggers passed with earbuds in. None of them knew the man beside them had been abandoned like luggage. At the tourist office, a young woman with a bright smile greeted me. "How can I help you?" "Sir?" "I need to get back to Colorado," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "Fort Collins." Her eyebrows shot up. "That's quite a trip. You'll need to get to Reno or Sacramento for a bus or flight connection." "What's the fastest option?" "Bus to Reno leaves in 2 hours. $35. You'll need ID." My hand went to my chest. Relief flooded me when I pulled out my driver's license. I slid it across the counter with the cash. She printed a ticket, handed it over, and wished me luck. With the ticket in my pocket, I crossed the street to a small cafe and ordered the cheapest cup of coffee they had. I sat by the window, sipping slowly, my eyes on the ticking clock. In my mind, I pictured Clarissa and Graham returning to the cottage, finding me gone, finding the key missing, realizing the helpless old man had outsmarted them. But I wasn't finished yet. I still had to get across half the country. I still had to find out how deep their betrayal went. And most of all, I still had to fight for my dignity. As the bus pulled into the station, engine rumbling, I straightened my back and stood. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something dangerous and alive in my chest. Not fear. Resolve. The bus ride back to Colorado felt endless. 3 days and 2 nights of cramped seats, lukewarm coffee from vending machines, and the sharp ache in my legs every time we stopped for 20 minutes at a depot. Yet I clutched my small bag like a lifeline and pressed forward. Each mile carried me farther from their trap and closer to the only ground where I might still have control. Home. When the bus finally rolled into Fort Collins, the familiar sight of the foothills nearly broke me. My body ached. My eyelids were heavy, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. I took a cab straight from the station to my bank. The teller, a polite young man in glasses, confirmed what I already feared. Mr. C.I. Marston, there was an attempt to withdraw $20,000 from your account in Portland yesterday. It flagged as suspicious, so the system froze the transaction. And my credit card? $5,000 charged at a boutique hotel, also in Portland. We've already reversed it. But, sir, someone had your card in their possession. I closed my eyes. Clarissa and Graham hadn't wasted a second. They were already spending what wasn't theirs. I want everything locked down. I told him. Cancel the card. Freeze every joint account. No access but mine. He nodded, typing quickly. I watched the keystrokes like a man watching bolts slide into place on a fortress gate. But banking was only the first step. I needed legal clarity. So I walked 2 blocks further, to the office of Harriet Lowell, the lawyer Margaret and I had used for decades. She had been at our side through refinancing, wills, even Clarissa's first car purchase. If there was any thread of protection left to me, Harriet would find it. She rose when I entered, her gray hair neatly pinned, her eyes sharp as ever. Elliot, she said warmly, though her gaze quickly flicked over my disheveled clothes, the exhaustion on my face. What's happened? I sat heavily in the chair across from her desk. Harriet, my daughter and her husband are trying to have me declared incompetent. They've stolen my card, tried to drain my accounts. I need to know where I stand. She opened a file drawer, pulling out a thick manila folder marked Marston Family. Let's start with assets. You remember when you gave Clarissa and Graham that $50,000 for the down payment on their Boulder County home? Of course. You didn't just sign over money, she said, flipping through papers. You signed a co-ownership clause. 1/3 of that property is legally yours. They cannot sell, refinance, or alter the deed without your consent. The word struck me like a bell. 1/3. Mine. Harriet slid the deed across the desk. If you wish, Elliot, you can initiate a forced sale. It would require court approval, but given your share, the law would side with you. I stared at the paper, my hands trembling not from weakness, but from possibility. Clarissa and Graham thought they had stripped me of everything. They had no idea I still held the very ground beneath their feet. For the first time since Margaret's death, I felt something spark in my chest. Not just resolve, not just defiance. Power. And I intended to use it. The moment I walked out of Harriet's office, the October air felt different, crisper, sharper, almost like I could breathe again. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't cornered prey. I still had teeth. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, Margaret's picture propped beside me, and mapped out my next steps. Every humiliation, every false story, every cruel whisper Clarissa and Graham had crafted, they would pay for each one. Not with violence, not with shouting, but with the very tools they had tried to use against me. Paper, law, and silence. First stop was the bank again. A young manager led me into a private office after I explained my concerns. Do you still have that joint account you opened with Clarissa back when she was in law school? He asked, scrolling through records. My stomach clenched. I had nearly forgotten. Margaret and I had set it up decades ago, just in case Clarissa needed a safety net. I hadn't checked it in years. The manager turned the screen toward me. Balance is $27,400. Mostly small deposits over the years. Looks untouched for a while. My pulse quickened. Close it. Transfer every cent to my personal account. He tapped quickly, printed a receipt, and slid it across the desk. I folded it carefully into my wallet. One more chain cut. One more brick pulled from the wall of their scheme. Next, I called the county clerk's office about Graham's SUV, the flashy black Escalade he had parked in my garage 2 years ago when he claimed their own was too crowded. Since then, it had sat gathering dust. No tags. No payments. No sign he intended to retrieve it. Mr. Marston, the clerk said after checking records. Under Colorado statute, you're within your rights to file an abandoned property claim if the vehicle has been on your property more than 12 months without written permission. You'd need to publish notice. Then if there's no contest, you can sell it. The corner of my mouth lifted. Let's start the paperwork. That night, I drafted a list of every step. Close accounts. File claim. Push Harriet to begin the process of a partition sale on the Boulder County house. Piece by piece, I was dismantling the empire of arrogance Clarissa and Graham had built on my back. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about the narrative. They had tried to paint me as a helpless old man fading into dementia. I wanted the world to see the truth that I was still here, still thinking, still capable of defending what was mine. When I finally lay down that night, Margaret's photo on the nightstand caught the glow of the lamp. For the first time in months, I whispered to her without choking back tears. I am coming back to myself. Love. They won't take me down. Somewhere deep inside, I almost heard her voice again, proud, steady, unshaken, and I knew this was only the beginning. By mid-November, the war that Clarissa and Graham had started spilled out of whispers and shadows and into the courtroom. Harriet had filed the petition for a partition sale of the Boulder County property. The house, worth nearly $1 million, could not legally remain under their control without my consent. Clarissa's response came within a week, thick with venom. Her attorney filed a counterclaim, alleging that I was mentally unfit, that I suffered from severe memory decline and impaired judgment. The morning of the hearing, I wore my best navy suit, the one Margaret had bought me for our 40th anniversary. Harriet stood tall beside me, her silver hair gleaming under the courthouse lights. Clarissa and Graham sat across the aisle with their lawyer, smug and confident. Clarissa's eyes locked on me, cold and sharp, as though she were already measuring the victory. The judge entered, a lean man, with sharp features, and an expression that tolerated no games. Papers shuffled. The clerk called the case. And suddenly my life was being dissected in public. Their attorney spoke first. Your Honor, my clients are deeply concerned about Mr. Inframent Marston's declining faculties. They've witnessed numerous incidents of confusion, misplaced items, forgotten conversations. They fear he is no longer capable of handling financial matters responsibly. I sat rigid, fists clenched on my knees. Every word was a lie, rehearsed, polished, spoken with false sincerity. Then came the stack of papers, medical evaluations, supposedly proving their case. Harriet rose instantly. Objection. Your Honor. These are unsigned, uncertified, and directly contradicted by 3 independent evaluations we've submitted to the court. The judge raised an eyebrow, flipping through the pages. M's. Lowell is correct. These documents carry no legal weight. He looked directly at Clarissa. Do you have actual medical evidence? Clarissa shifted in her seat, her lips pressed thin. Graham glanced at the floor. Their lawyer cleared his throat but had nothing to add. Harriet seized the moment. Your Honor, my client is of sound mind. To prove it, he voluntarily underwent full evaluation by a neurologist, a psychiatrist, and a primary physician. All 3 reports confirm his competence. The opposing side, instead of respecting the truth, fabricated stories and submitted false paperwork. Their behavior speaks volumes. The judge leaned back, studying me. Mr. Marston, would you please stand? I rose, steady though my knees protested. Can you tell the court what this hearing is about? Yes, Your Honor, I said clearly. My daughter and her husband wish to control the house I partly own. They've tried to discredit me to take what isn't theirs. I may be 76, but my mind is clear, and I know exactly what I am doing. The courtroom was silent. For once, Clarissa had no clever retort. The judge tapped his pen against the desk. I've reviewed the evidence. The co-ownership deed is valid. Mr. Marston has every right to initiate a partition sale. Motion granted. Clarissa gasped, half rising from her seat. You can't. Sit down. Ems. Marston. The judge cut her off, his gavel striking once. The sound echoed through the chamber like thunder. In that instant, the story they had tried to weave around me unraveled completely. And for the first time, I watched my daughter look afraid. The judgment echoed in my mind long after Wed left the courthouse. Clarissa had stormed out, her heels striking the marble floor like gunshots. Graham trailing behind with a face drained of color. Harriet urged me to head straight home. But I shook my head. Something inside me needed closure, not in front of a judge, but face to face, where all the lies had begun. So I called them. My voice was calm, deliberate. Meet me at Bellamy's Cafe on Pearl Street. 1 hour. When I arrived, the little cafe smelled of roasted beans and fresh bread. The late autumn sun poured through the windows, casting long golden stripes across the tables. I chose a corner seat, my back to the wall. It wasn't long before Clarissa and Graham walked in. She looked furious, her makeup smudged, eyes red from either anger or tears. Graham wore the tight expression of a man whose arrogance had just been beaten down in public. They sat opposite me without a word. For a moment, only the hiss of the espresso machine filled the silence. You ruined us, Clarissa snapped finally, her voice low but trembling. Do you realize what you've done? Where are we supposed to go now? I folded my hands on the table. You had a home. You had security. You had me. But you chose greed over family. You tried to erase me. Graham leaned forward, his knuckles pressing into the wood. You're twisting this. We were looking out for you. You're too old to manage money. Too old to make decisions. You could have lost everything. I looked him in the eye. Steady. The only thing I lost was my daughter the day she listened to you instead of her own heart. Clarissa flinched as if I had struck her. Dad, she began. But I raised a hand. No. Listen. I would have given you everything willingly. Not because you demanded it. Not because you lied. I would have signed over the house. The accounts. Anything because that's what fathers do when they trust their children. But you couldn't wait. You chose deception. You made me out to be weak. Confused. Half alive. And when you left me in Maine, you made sure I felt disposable. Her lips quivered. We panicked. Graham said, if we didn't act, you'd waste your savings on lawyers or strangers. He convinced me it was the only way. I turned to Graham. And you convinced her because you thought I was too blind to see your hunger. You thought it'd fade quietly. For once, Graham had no answer. I leaned back, my voice softer now. You'll get your share of the house sale. More than enough to start over. But as for me, I am done. No more calls. No more checks. No more second chances. You've taken enough years. Enough peace. My life belongs to me again. Clarissa's eyes filled with tears. Dad. Please. I stood slowly, my chair scraping the tile. You had a father. You traded him for money. And now, you have neither. Leaving them sitting in stunned silence, I walked out into the crisp Colorado air. For the first time in years, I felt light, as though a weight had finally been lifted. Winter settled over Boulder, snow powdering the foothills and frosting the lake outside my apartment. The house sale closed at the end of December. My share $233,000 sat in my account, untouchable by Clarissa or Graham. Their share was wired to them through the court. I never asked where they went after moving out. Some nights, I wondered if they bought another house or rented a place where no one knew them. But the wondering ended quickly. I had no desire to follow their path anymore. Life became quiet in a way that soothed me. My mornings returned to ritual, coffee the way Margaret had made it, toast, and the sunrise spilling over the Rockies. I made new acquaintances in the apartment complex, people my age who knew me only as Elliot, a retired surveyor, a widower who liked chess and long walks. None of them knew the story of betrayal and courtroom battles. And for once, I liked it that way. But the silence of family weighed on me, especially in January when Hazel and Andrew, my grandchildren, would be home from college. Years had passed since I had last seen them. Did they know the truth? Or only the lies Clarissa had spun? That question lived in the back of my mind, like an ember that refused to die. One cold afternoon, the answer arrived. A plain envelope, with no return address, appeared in my mailbox. Inside was a postcard of the Colorado mountains, the very view from Trail Ridge Road in Rocky Mountain National Park. On the back, scrawled in blue ink, were just a few words. "Thank you for standing your ground. We know the truth now. Hazel." My hands trembled as I read it over and over. Hazel, my granddaughter, had reached out, breaking through the wall her parents had built. She knew. They both knew. And in that single line, forgiveness and understanding felt closer than they had in years. I placed the postcard in the same drawer where I kept Margaret's letters. It didn't matter if Hazel had no address for me to reply. What mattered was the bridge had not been burned completely. Somewhere in the distance, my bloodline still carried hope. That night, I sat by the window watching snow fall across the lake. The silence no longer felt like loneliness but peace. I had been betrayed, abandoned, treated like a burden. Yet, by reclaiming my dignity, by refusing to surrender to lies, I had preserved the only thing that truly mattered: self-respect. The lesson was carved deep. Family is not defined by blood alone. Family is built by loyalty, honesty, and love. When those vanish, all that remains is manipulation disguised as duty. But when even one person, a granddaughter with courage in her pen, chooses truth, the cycle can be broken. I raised my glass of tea toward the dark glass of the window, imagining Margaret's reflection smiling back at me. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying regret. I was carrying freedom. And in the quiet of that winter evening, I knew I would live the rest of my days at peace. Not because of what I lost, but because of what I finally found myself.